Snacking Swifters! In this video, we'll be saving reviews, and we'll be working with more complex database structures, in this case specifically saving documents to a collection in a document in a collection. Now we'll issue 3 challenges because we want to make sure that you've really got down those Cloud Firestore skills, but we'll give you some hints along the way, and we'll show answers right after the challenge slides. Giddy up! Right now we're saving spot data, but we also want to be able to save multiple reviews for each spot. So how are we going to do that? Well, Cloud Firestore allows us to continue to build out our database, almost like a tree with branches. Now remember, a collection is made up of multiple documents. Our spots collection has multiple spot documents, and each one represents a spot or a restaurant. Well, we're going to go even deeper in this tree structure by adding another collection for each spot document, and those collections will be collections of reviews. Each review document contains information about that review, the title of the review text, the rating, who posted it, and when it was posted. Now, we could have created another collection at the same level as the spot to hold reviews, but we didn't want to have to look through all of the reviews whenever we just wanted to get the reviews for a given spot. So this data structure where the reviews are stored inside of the spot document makes more sense for us. And Cloud Firestore will allow you to go deeper and deeper in your database structure. You just have to start with a collection and then alternate collection document, collection document. You can go pretty deeply if you need to. Now, the saving and loading we're going to be doing with review documents inside of the reviews collection is going to work similarly to the way that we did this with spot documents inside of the spots plural collection. Now, there's one important difference. Each time we save or load reviews, we need to know the spot that we're referring to, since each spot has its own reviews. Now, because of this, whenever we pass data into the review detail table view controller that we created in the previous video, we'll also need to pass over the spot so that we can refer to the spot ID when we save any new reviews or we update any existing reviews. Now you have the knowledge to be able to set up a review class by leveraging what you already learned creating the spot class. And although you've never saved a document inside of a collection that was inside of another document, why don't you give this a shot and see how far you can get. Now in this first challenge, we're going to create a review class with its properties and initializers. We're not going to add the save data method yet. And if you get tripped up, don't get discouraged. You're still really early in your developer career, but trying challenges like this and seeing how far you can get is a great way to give those software developer brain muscles a workout so you can try your hands at new things you've never done before. So give these slides a try. If you get stuck, no biggie. We'll go through the answer together in just a bit. So the steps and hints for our first challenge are across these first 3 slides. First, create the review class and use the spot class as your guide. Now the review class should have these properties: title a string, text a string, rating an int, review user ID a string, that'll let us identify the user that posted the review, date, which is a date type, that's an Apple type, and document ID, which is a string. Now just like spot, your review class should also have a dictionary computed property, and this should return a string any dictionary created from the properties of the review, just like the dictionary computed property in spot did using spot properties. Since the review class is going to work pretty similarly to the way the spot class works, we're going to have 3 initializers just like spot. We'll have a default or base initializer. We'll have a convenience initializer that creates a new review with blank or empty 0 values when it has no parameters. Now, one difference with this initializer, I want you to set the class's review user ID property to the app's current user's UID string. And that's because any new review, when it starts out blank, can be set up as a review that's going to be saved by the current user. There's a hint on this coming. And you'll need a convenience initializer that accepts a dictionary. That's this collection of string any key value pairs. And that's the stuff that's read in from Cloud Firestore, so it should use that dictionary to create a new instance of the review class. We actually aren't going to use that until we load in data. We're first going to save data, but why don't we create it now anyway? Again, just like the one in Spot. Now, some things to note. Cloud Firestore does not support Apple's date type. So we're going to need to convert the date value, which is that Apple date type, into a time interval, which is Apple type time interval, but that's just a type alias for a double, and you can definitely save doubles into Cloud Firestore. Now, if you're still unsure how to do this, there's another hint coming on the next slide. But you'll want to do this before saving to Cloud Firestore. You're going to do this in the dictionary computed property that creates a dictionary from the properties in the review. So again, this is going from our review object out to Cloud Firestore. We're going to take the date and turn it into a time interval as part of turning our review into the dictionary that we're about to save to Cloud Firestore. Now, when we eventually load data in from Cloud Firestore is going to give us back the dictionary, and we need to convert that into a review. And that's where we need to take the time interval that we get from the Cloud Firestore dictionary and convert that into a date. Now we'll do that inside of the convenience initializer that accepts the dictionary. That's the collection of string any key value pairs. So you're going to take the double, aka the time interval type alias, that we read from Cloud Firestore, and we're going to convert that into the Apple date type. And that converted date is what's going to go into the review's date property. Some more hints. So when you convert the review's date property into a time interval, which is a double, what you want to do is create a constant. So you could say something like let lower camel-case time interval date equals date, which is the property inside of the review, dot time interval since 1970. Remember, that's a way you can convert any Apple date into this thing, which is a double, also called a time interval. Then once you have it as the time interval, that's what you can save out as the value associated with the key value pairs where you're saving out the date. Now that's when you save things out to Cloud Firestore. What if you come back? Well, again, that's the convenience initializer. You're going to get a dictionary. So what do you want to do? In that dictionary that comes from Cloud Firestore, that's where you get your time interval, which is, remember, the same thing as a double. And what you're going to do, if you take a look at your dictionary convenience initializer and Spot, you have lines that look like this, which is going to be a constant that you find from the dictionary's key, and you give it an alternative just in case that comes back with nil. So you can create a time interval constant, reading date from the dictionary as a time interval, which is the same as a double. And if you don't get one, this called a time interval with empty parens is the same thing as passing in a double of value 0.0. Once you get that time interval, you can create a date by saying let date equals upper camel-case date, which is the type, and you'll pass that through this initializer type, upper camel-case date, and you're going to select the initializer type that has time interval since 1970 and pass in the time interval date that you just read in from Cloud Firestore. Now here's your last hint. In the review class's no parameter convenience initializer, you want to get the current user's UID string, and you can do it using this line of code. So don't worry about the save data method in the review class yet. There are a few more things we need to cover before we get there, but try to create the review class with the properties and initializers as outlined in these slides. Pause, give it a shot, and here's a look at a solution. So let's start by creating our new review class. We'll do that right underneath Spots. So I'll right-click on Spots. I'll select New File, Switch File, next, name it Review, Create. We want to import Firebase right away. We'll say Class, Capital Review, open and close curly, and then we'll put in the properties. var title :string, var text :string, var rating :int, var review user ID :string, var date :date, var document ID :string. Then we'll create our computed property dictionary. We'll say var dictionary : and then in brackets string :any, close brackets, open and close curlies. Now remember, the reason why we have this dictionary computed property is we take all of the properties in the class and convert it to a dictionary because Cloud Firestore needs to save a dictionary. Now, as mentioned in the challenge slides, we can't save a date to Cloud Firestore. That's a special Apple type, so we need to take the date property and convert it to a time interval, which is also a double. So in order to do this conversion, as was suggested on the slide, we'll say let time interval date, lower camel-case, that's just a constant we're creating, equals lowercase date, that's this property of the review class, dot, and to handle the conversion, we'll select time interval since 1970. And now that we've converted the Apple date to the time interval date, we can go ahead and return our dictionary. So we'll say return, bracket, and then each of the key value pairs. Each of the key names in double quotes is named exactly like its property name. So we'll say in double quotes title, title, comma, in double quotes text, text, comma, in double quotes rating, rating, comma, in double quotes review user ID, review user ID, comma, in quotes date, but we're passing in time interval date that we just created above. Gotta save that out as a double, not a date. And remember, we don't need to add the document ID to the dictionary because that's already saved as the name of the document. Now let's create our default initializer, and remember we pass in a parameter for each of the properties in our class that need initialization, so we'll say init, open parentheses, title :string, comma, text :string, comma, rating :int, comma, review user ID :string, comma, date :date. Remember, the class itself does use date, the Apple date, so we want date in here, comma, document ID :string. And remember, that's because the class does keep track of the document ID, even though we don't save it as part of the dictionary that has class data. Then make sure you got your close parenthesis in there and open and close curlies. Then we assign the values we passed in to each of the properties in the class. So we'll say self.title equals title, self.text equals text, self.rating equals rating, self.review user ID equals review user ID, self.date equals date, and self.document ID equals document ID. Next up is the convenience initializer that initializes a new instance of this class, but without passing any values in. So we'll say convenience space init, open and close parentheses, open and close curlies. Now up first, as mentioned earlier, we're going to set our review user ID in any initial blank review created by this convenience initializer to the currently authorized user's login ID. Why is that? Well, this convenience initializer is called whenever we create a new review. And who is it that's creating the new review in our app? That's the user that's logged in. So we'll do that by creating our constant let review user ID equals and then capital auth. And oh look, at least in my version of Xcode as I'm running this, code completion isn't recognizing Cloud Firestore. Now when I see this happen, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, maybe I forgot to import the Firebase library into this class. But we already did that. Now, if this happens to you, you can try to do a Shift-Command-K to do a rebuild. If Xcode still isn't recognizing libraries and code completion, you can try building and running. Now, before I do that, I'm going to have to delete the statement that I started entering. It's an incomplete statement that would cause an error. I also need to cut out this incomplete initializer, otherwise I'll get an error for that too. Now, there's no need for me to show you building and running. Just know that when I was able to get an error-free build and run, then return to my code and pasted back the initializer stub that I cut out before, when I started coding, let review user ID equals capital auth, and there we go. We can see code completion now recognizes everything that was in the Firebase library. So we want to make sure that we have capital auth dot and then lowercase auth with the open and close parens dot current user. Again, this is going to get the current user that's logged into the app. Also note that current user is of optional Firebase type user, so we're going to have to deal with the possibility of this being a nil. Dot UID, and code completion says this is the provider's UID for the user. That's exactly what we want, that unique user identifier. So select that. Xcode should automatically add a question mark after current user because that was an optional. Now that does create a bit of a problem for us because we want to make sure that what we're saving to Cloud Firestore is going to be a full string. It's never going to be nil, but if we option click on review user ID, you see how it says string question mark. That means it could be nil, so we need to deal with that. We'll use our nil coalescing operator, so we'll say question mark, and then put in an empty string. Now just to verify, if you option click on review user ID, you'll see it's a string, no longer an optional string. Mission accomplished. Now remember, every convenience initializer still needs to call the base initializer and pass in the parameters that the base initializer needs. So I'm just going to highlight this first line of the base initializer through the end parentheses, not the opening curly, copy it with a Command C, then paste it in as the last line of the convenience initializer. And then I'm going to change all of the types in here to empty values that I would use if I were creating a new review. So title will be empty string, text empty string, rating will be 0, review user ID will be review user ID, this constant we just created above. Now date will also be capital date open and close parens. That will set the date as current date, and that's what we want to do whenever you post a review. If you want to set the date it was posted on, well, it should be the current date. And finally, document ID should be an empty string. And Xcode says I have an error in this line. Oops, it's because I forgot to add self. So I'll click fix. Now it's self.init. Perfect. Now again, if you got tripped up, don't feel bad. You are way better off than if you just raced ahead and copied the code that I'd entered on screen. If you did that, you wouldn't even know what you didn't know. And if you ran into problems, hopefully the solution we just gave helps you now understand what at first you didn't know, so you will be armed to overcome any similar challenges on your own projects. Remember, in coding, practice does make you better, so you want to practice, you want to keep coding. And now we've got a super easy challenge you all should be able to do. You're going to create a reviews plural with an S at the end class. You can use the spots plural class as your guide. The reviews class will have the following properties: a review array, which is an array of the review class that you just created. Initialize it as an empty array at first. And a DB property, which is a type inside of the Firebase library of type Firestore. Now at this point, all I want you to add is one initializer. That's the initializer that you've got just like inside of Spots. This initializer accepts no parameters, but it creates a new Firebase database instance and assigns this to the DB property mentioned above. So why don't you pause, give it your best shot, and let's look at the solution. I know you got this. So let's create reviews plural right underneath the review.swift file. We'll right click on that. We'll select new file. This is a Swift file. Select next. Give it the name reviews with an S at the end. Click on create. And just like in Spots and just like in our review file, we want to make sure that we import Firebase so we have access to all of those wonderful data structures. Then we'll say class capital reviews with an S, open and close curlies, and we'll enter our properties. And those are var review array, colon, bracket, capital review, close bracket, equals, and then empty open and close brackets. And also we want to declare var, db, colon, and that's capital Firestore, with an exclamation point because it's an implicitly unwrapped optional. And this class needs an initializer, but we'll pass in no parameters. So we'll say init, open and close parens, open and close curlies. And then inside here, we'll say db, that value we created above, equals capital Firestore, dot, and then select Firestore with open and close parens afterward. Second challenge done. Now, we're not quite done with our challenges in this video lesson. As Steve Jobs would say, there's one more thing. In this last challenge, we're going to create a save data method in the review class. It's going to be very similar to Spot save data, but remember the difference that we have here is we're not just saving document inside of an existing collection. What you're doing is you're going inside of the collection spots to a specific Spot document, then that Spot document's collection of reviews, and saving that individual review. Now, that implies a save data inside of the review class is going to also accept a spot. So when you declare it, you're going to also be passing in the spot. I give you an example of that right here when you declare the save data function. Now, another thing that's going to be different inside of save data in the review class, you won't need any of the stuff in your spot save data code that refers to posting user ID. There's no posting user ID in your review class. We've already set up our review user ID in our convenience initializer that doesn't accept any parameters. Now, another thing to pay attention to, in the previous save data in Spot, every document that you saved or added was added just inside of this collection named Spots. So you worked with statements that started with db.collection, and then you had Spots, which is the name of the collection. Now here, you're going to refer to db collection spots, then the document is going to be the spot that you passed into save data, document ID. It's document ID. Then inside that spot document, that particular restaurant's document, you're going to have the reviews in there. That's in a collection called reviews. And then inside of that is where you're going to save new reviews or update existing review documents. So why don't you give this final challenge a try, compare what you come up with against the solution that follows, and then later in this tutorial, we'll write code together to handle the save. Now we're going to need to update the project to pass in the spot into the review table view controller along with any review selected. But for now, why don't you pause, try your best to solve the challenge outlined on this slide, and let's take a look at a solution. So for your comparison, here's the code we're about to enter as our save data function in our review class. Now the only lines we needed to change from the save data function that was inside of our spot class are those that are underlined in neon green. But as I mentioned also in the challenge, I got rid of any lines that were referring to the posting user ID. So let me quickly code up this solution. So I'm going to head over to spot.swift. I'm going to highlight the entire save data function from the beginning of the function to the last curly brace. That's the one just before the final curly brace in the class. Then I'll copy that, return to review.swift, and I'll paste it in just before the last curly brace in this class. Now in the first line of this function where we define the function, remember we said that we need to pass in a spot? Well, all we need to do after the opening parenthesis is say lowercase spot, colon, uppercase spot, comma, and that's it. Next up in the challenge, I mentioned that you could get rid of everything that mentions the posting user ID. So that's this whole block from the comment that says grab user ID all the way down to the self.posting user ID equals posting user ID. I'm going to highlight all that and then delete it with a backspace. Next, let's change where we're saving our document in the database. So in the Spot class, we saved any new documents inside of the Spots collection, but for our review class, we're going to need to save the document inside of the reviews collection that's inside of the Spot document that's named with that Spots document ID, and that's inside of the Spots collection. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this line here that says ref equals db.collections in parentheses the string spots, and then right after the dot we're going to add dot document, then in between the parentheses passing in spot.document ID, then dot collection, followed by in parentheses the string reviews, plural, dot, and then we're going to follow that with the rest of the code we had in there earlier, beginning with add document. And we don't really have to update this print statement down here. It's just a console message to the developer that confirms that things are working okay. But why don't we go ahead anyway and add to spot, string interp, and inside that spot.document ID. Next up, we need to modify this line where we're about to update an existing document, and we'll do that just like we did above. So this starts off let ref equals db collection, and then in parentheses the string spots, dot, and then we'll add document, and in parentheses pass in spot.document ID, then dot collection. Remember, we alternate collection, document, collection, and in parentheses we'll pass in the string reviews because we're saving this review to the reviews collection, and then dot, and then we'll keep everything else that was on this line. That's document in parens self.document ID. And finally, let's update the print statement that confirms that we've updated a document. So I'll highlight the change I made up here for the print statement confirming that we've added a document, and I'll paste that little bit down below inside the end of this print statement, changing the word to the word in. So the print statement now reads, updated document, string interp self.document ID in spot.document ID. Now Xcode is giving me an error. If I click on the little red error ball in the title bar, I can see that it's in the reviews.swift file, and if I look in that file, I can see the error says no such module Firebase. That's one of those bogus Xcode errors that occurs when it's not recognizing that a valid CocoaPod library has been installed. We can ignore that, there aren't any legitimate errors, so let's keep going, and we'll head over to spot table view controller.swift. Now we're going to need a few functions in here that we haven't written yet, including update user interface and update from user interface, so let's write the stubs for those right now, right here under view.load. We'll say func update user interface, open and close parens, open and close curlies, and then func update from user interface, open and close parens, open and close curlies. Now let's write the code for when we click on the save button, so we'll scroll down to save button pressed, and our first line in that function is going to be a call to update from user interface, and that's because we want to make sure that we got all of the data that the user has entered into the user interface before we save that data to Cloud Firestore with a call to review.saveData. Then below this, we want to call review.saveData, but hey, it's not showing up in code completion. And the reason for that is we have not yet declared a review variable, so let's scroll up and do that right underneath all of our IB outlets. We'll add the code var review : capital review ! And remember, we're going to need a spot in this view controller code so that we know the right spot document where we should save this review. So we'll add that property with var spot : capital spot ! Now let's write the code in view.load that's going to handle when these values are passed in from the previous view controller. We could do this a few different ways, but why don't we say guard spot not equal to nil else, open and close curlies, and in between the curlies, if we fail and the guard kicks us out, we'll first write print and then in quotes, error, no spot passed to review table view controller.swift, and then right under that we can write return. Then let's handle the situation if the review were nil, and that would be the case if you click the button to add a new review. So in that situation we need to create a new review object, so we'll say if lowercase review equals nil, open and close curlies, and if that's the case, let's create a review. Lowercase review equals uppercase review, open and close parens. Our convenience initializer will handle creating a new review with nothing in it but that records the review user ID. Then underneath that we can call update user interface. Now let's head over to spot detail view controller.swift, and this is where we need to pass over the spot that we're about to review. So we'll do that inside of our prepare for segue. Why don't we add the prepare for segue? Oh, how about right underneath our update from user interface function? So I'll start to type in prepare, I'll select prepare for segue, Xcode writes in the stub, I'll first call update from user interface here. That's because before I segue, I want to make sure that I've grabbed any updated information the user has entered about the spot that I'm about to review. Now we're eventually going to make sure that we've saved any spot before we can review it as well. We'll deal with that later, but for now, let's just handle the segues. So inside prepare for segue, under update from user interface, I'm actually going to use a switch case statement to identify which segue I need to handle. And the reason I'm using a switch case statement instead of an if else is we'll eventually have at least 4 segues in this view controller. And you can see this by taking a look at an example of where we're headed with this app. The user could click on a table view cell to show an existing review, that's one segue. They could click on a review button to add a review, that's another one. And we'll eventually get the collection view working, and that will hold photos, so the user can click on a photo to see an existing photo for that spot. That's another segue to another view controller we haven't created yet. Or they could click on the photo button and add a new photo, again, on a view controller we haven't created yet. So switch case is the way to go. I'm going to type in switch. I'll select this from code completion. Xcode creates a starting switch case statement that I can modify. The value I'm switching on will be segue.identifier. But hey, let's take a look at the type of the identifier in code completion. See how it says string ? That means it's an optional string. That means it could be nil, so we've got to deal with that. And in this case, I'll deal with that using nil coalescing. So I'll say ? And then after that, put in an empty string. Well, for now, I've just got 2 segues. So under the first case, I'll replace pattern with the string add review, upper camel case. Then just before the default, I'll put in another case. I'll say case, and then in quotes, show review, upper camel case with a colon after it. Then for the default case, I'll print a message to the console indicating there was a problem. I'll say print, and in quotes, couldn't find a case for segue identifier, string interp, segue.identifier. This should not have happened, angry emoji. Now, when we're performing an add review segue, we're going to allow the user to enter data so that they can add a new review. But we need to also pass the current spot to the review table view controller, so that if we save the review we're about to add, we'll know to save it to that spot's reviews collection. Now, most of the time when we pass data to a view controller, we're doing it when a user clicks on a table view cell and we show segue directly to some kind of detail view controller. That's what we're doing if the user clicks on a review in the list of reviews in this table view. See how there's no navigation controller between when we click on the table view cell and we go to the review table view controller? But up here, when we add a review, we've got a bit of a challenge. You see, we can't get the destination as segue.destination because the destination is the first view controller that we're headed to in this segue, and that's actually this navigation controller here. So what we need to do is first get this navigation controller and then use this navigation controller to get to the view controller that we're eventually headed to. So we just need to pass through the navigation controller. Now to do that, we're going to use this statement here, navigation controller dot view controllers dot first. So view controllers is an array of all of the view controllers that are associated with the navigation controller. Now the reason why this is an array is there could be lots of different view controllers attached to a single navigation controller. We can see that in our current app. You see the initial view controller is this first navigation controller all the way over here on the left. All four of these view controllers that we're getting to via show segues along the bottom are view controllers that this navigation controller can reach. All of these view controllers would be listed in the array of view controllers named view controllers that's a property of this navigation controller. Now we just want the first one after we hit the navigation controller that we're headed to, so that's why we use dot first. It's going to get the first element, the first view controller in the array, and then once we get that, we can use as exclamation point to downcast that view controller to our review table view controller, and then we can pass data to that destination like we normally would. And so now that we have this knowledge, let's use it in our code. So under case add review, we're going to first get the navigation controller and then use that to get the navigation controller's destination, which is our final destination. So we'll say let navigation controller equals segue.destination as exclamation point UI navigation controller. Then we'll create our destination. We'll say let destination equals navigation controller dot view controllers. Those are all the view controllers that are associated with that navigation controller. Now in our app for this navigation controller, there's only one view controller in this array anyway. Then after view controllers dot first as exclamation point review table view controller. Then all we want to do after this is just say destination dot spot equals spot. And the reason for that is we want to pass over the spot because we need to keep track of which spot we're saving this review at, but we don't have any review to pass over yet because this is going to be a new review. Now under our case show review, the code is much more familiar. When you click on a review, we're using a show segue to go straight through to a destination. So we don't have to find a navigation controller before we get to our final destination. Just remember, when the user has clicked a review to see, we need to pass over not only that review that was selected, but also the spot that's related to that review. So we'll say let destination equals segue.destination as exclamation point review table view controller. Let selected index path equals table view.index path for selected row exclamation point. And then destination.review equals reviews.review. Oh, the reviews variable we had declared was just a string array. It was a placeholder. So now we need to declare that as a class reviews type. So let's scroll to the top where we've declared our properties. We see that we've got the old var reviews in here that's a string array. I'm going to highlight and delete everything after var reviews : and I'm going to replace that with capital reviews exclamation point. Now we're eventually going to load data in update user interface, but for now, let's scroll down to view did load, and right after our setup map view, just before update user interface, we'll say lowercase reviews equals uppercase reviews, open and close curly. That initializes an empty reviews object with no elements in reviews.review array. And since we just changed the type for reviews, we needed to head down to the extension where we deal with the table view. And in the first function, number of rows in section, we're going to change what we return to reviews.reviewArray.count. And for now, we won't make any changes in cell for row app, but we'll put in a comment to update the custom spot review table view cell here, although we haven't created the file for that cell yet. And as an extra reminder, just above this comment line, we'll put in another to-do comment that says deal with custom cell. Now we're ready to jump back to our prepare for segue function and fill out the case for show review. So we'll make sure that that says destination.review equals reviews.review array, and then in brackets selected index path.row. And on the final line, we also want to pass over the spot, so we'll say destination.spot equals spot. Now the error that's showing up in my Xcode is just that bogus import error, no real problem there. So let's head over to review table view controller.swift, and we'll fill out the update user interface function so we can see something on the view controller. We'll say name label.text equals spot.name, address label.text equals spot.address, review title field.text equals review.title, review text field.text equals review.text, and we'll put in a to-do comment to eventually update for ratings. Then an update from user interface, we'll say review.title equals review title field.text exclamation point, review.text equals review text view.text exclamation point. Then we can head down to our save button pressed function, and finally make the call to review.saveData. We'll pass in lowercase spot as the spot. We'll double click on the completion handler, enter success as our bool value, and inside the completion handler we'll deal with success. We'll say if success, open and close curlies, else, open and close curlies. In the else clause, we'll put in an error statement. We'll say print error. Can't unwind segue from a review because of a review saving error, angry emoji. Then in the success block above that, we'll just make our call to self.leave view controller. Friends, we're ready to build and run! Now I'm going to bring up my Firebase console for this project. I've selected the spot document for Pino's Pizza. I don't see any reviews collection for this record yet. With my app running, I'll select the cell for Pino's Pizza, click rating. Stars don't work yet, but I'll give this the title Fantastic, and the review text that says, Square Pizza is da bomb, and it indeed is. Try it. Then I'll save this review. We don't see a change in the Firestore console yet, but let's refresh the browser. When I refresh the browser, I lost my selection to Pino's, so in the console, I'll select that document again. And hey, will you look at that? Now we get the reviews collection inside the Pino's document. Click on Reviews, the console slides over. We see a long document ID for one document, which makes sense since we only added one review. We'll click on that and we see Square Pizza is da bomb fantastic. Dang, that's some database sweetness. Let's head back over to our app and offer another review. I'll say, best pizza near PC, fantastic sauce, click save, and hey, without refreshing the browser, I can see a new second reviews document was added inside the spot document for Pino's, and if I click it, I can see the review I just left. Swifter, you created a pretty complex database structure in the cloud. Go get yourself a slice, skilled one. We'll see you in the next video when we tackle loading those reviews. Keep at it.